Sometimes I hear from people who've had blood sugar in the diabetic range for 10, 15, 20, or even 30 years. How is it these people never improve, but just get worse and worse? And how can those chains be broken? One of the educational aspects of doing this YouTube channel is interacting with diabetics of all sorts. In many cases, I hear from men and women who've been diagnosed as diabetics in the last few months, and they're scared to death. But other times, people share that they've been diabetic for years and even decades. I find it amazing that people put up with diabetes for that long. Now, I guess I shouldn't be surprised because the old school thinking has been that diabetes never goes away, never gets better, and your condition always deteriorates as you go from misery to misery and from one medication to 2 to 3, and then to insulin and then more insulin, and so forth. For years, the standard idea about diabetes is that this condition is chronic and progressive. Chronic meaning it's always present and never goes away, and progressive, which means it only gets worse and worse. It never gets better. But after seeing so many diabetics becoming former diabetics in a matter of months or perhaps a year, and getting their numbers down from double-digit A1Cs into the non-diabetic range, sometimes I think, why do people with diabetes just put up with it so long? Why don't they do something about it early on? In this video, I want to share the 3 major reasons I believe diabetics stay diabetics and never make any progress. And having identified these reasons, it will be easy to see what is truly needed to break the chains of this terrible affliction and find the awesome freedom of normal glucose levels and relatively low insulin levels. I know there may be some other reasons, but let me give you what I believe are the top 3. The first reason that diabetics stay diabetics for years and years is a lack of hope. Sadly, nobody, not even their doctors or dietitians, encourages them to believe they can do much about their situation. So they're fundamentally hopeless about their diabetes. They're just one of the unlucky ones who happen to get diabetes, and all they can do is make the best of it, take their meds, and hope their complications will come later rather than sooner. It's unfortunate, but what can one do? They don't make any serious efforts to improve their situation. They don't believe there is anything that they could do that would make much of a difference. Let me give you an illustration that most of us can identify with. Can you remember when you were a kid in school and in PE your team was on the losing side of a softball game? But I'm not talking about losing by 1 or 2 runs. Your team was really bad, and after the first inning the score was 7-1 in the other team's favor. Perhaps you tried to tell yourself you would make up for it in the second inning, but after the first 2 innings the score was now 25-2. And suddenly you realized your team could not possibly win. But the problem is you still have 5 more innings to play. So you're playing in a lopsided softball game and you're on the losing side, and you know there's nothing you can do to change that. How does that affect you? Well, I'll tell you how it affects you. You give up. You start goofing off, acting silly. Your mind is distracted. You just go through the motions. You know you can't win. So why try? Sadly, that is precisely how some people view their diabetes. They see themselves as hopeless losers without any chance at all of beating this thing, and they make no serious efforts to overcome the bully that has attacked them. And so they go on as diabetics year after year, decade after decade, taking more and more meds, getting more and more complications until death finally claims them. What they've been told, which is that diabetes is chronic and progressive, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and their lack of hope has doomed them from the start. The second reason men and women go on in their diabetes year after year is related to the first one, but it's slightly different. It's a lack of motivation for other reasons. Perhaps they do believe they could improve their situation if they really put some effort into it, but they just can't find the will to get started. And things aren't so bad right now. Sure, their numbers are too high, but they feel pretty good, and the idea of making changes in their eating habits and their lifestyle is just too much to consider. Sometimes they'll say things like, well, life is just too short to deprive myself of all those comfort foods. I'd rather live a few years less and enjoy my life than cut out all my favorite treats and live a little bit longer. Additionally, no one is really challenging them to make the necessary changes. Not their doctor, not their dietitian, not their friends. Nobody is telling them to get radical and vicious in fighting back against the monster of diabetes. And so they might make a few mild token efforts, but they don't ever get serious about it. They're unmotivated, inert, apathetic, indifferent, and happy to be so. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Years down the road, they'll probably regret their foolish attitude, but for now it seems reasonable and their diet remains as awful as ever. The third reason that diabetics stay diabetics for years is simple ignorance. There's a scripture that says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." And that is surely the case with many diabetics. Some people tell you what you don't know can't hurt you, but in truth, with diabetes, what you don't know can maim and kill you. Within this category of ignorance, there are two major insights that people don't get and are totally oblivious of. The first insight that many diabetics are ignorant of, and probably the one truth that has set more people free than any other in connection with this YouTube channel, is that all carbohydrates, I repeat, all carbohydrates, are problematic for diabetics, not just candy and sweets. Years ago, I interviewed a lady who had tried to support her diabetic sister, but she had not realized the dangers of non-sweet carbohydrates. She read my book, and I later asked her what she learned from it, and she told me this.
My sister had been diabetic for many years, and I never understood the role that carbohydrates played in a diabetic's life. I thought if she didn't eat desserts, donuts, that kind of thing, that she would be okay. And when I read your first book, I learned what carbohydrates do. They just turn to sugar.
They just turn to sugar. And that, my friends, is the truth. Whether bread or potatoes or rice or cornflakes cereal, all carbs and starches are made up of sugar molecules bound tightly together in chains. And once they're eaten and your stomach acids go to work on them, they just turn into sugar, as Linda said. And the sugar they turn into is every bit as much real sugar as table sugar. Let's imagine you own a bed and breakfast, and a man like this tells you he wants to stay there for 2 weeks. He looks a little scary, but you need the money, so you provide him a room. But as he stays at your place, you find all sorts of items that go missing. Pictures on the wall, silverware, even some of your furniture starts to disappear. Finally, you've had enough, and you kick this thief out of your bed and breakfast and demand he leave. But shortly after that, a sweet, pleasant-looking little old lady rents a room from you. She looks so nice and innocent. You know she's not going to be any problem. By this time, you've replaced all the stolen items. But strangely, as she stays there, you find once again things are disappearing. Pictures, furniture, pillows, light fixtures, lamps, everything seems to be disappearing. You set up some security cameras all over the place, and you soon discover the terrible truth. This nice, sweet little old lady is robbing you blind. She's just as bad as that first guy. Well, that is just about how sugary candy and starches and grains work. The sweet potatoes and the whole wheat bread seem so innocent, so natural, so beautiful, you just can't imagine them having the same effect upon you as the chocolate cake or the donuts. But once you set up your security camera, which is Mike the Meter, he tells you that they're all about equally bad. They're all driving your blood sugar out of control and sending it into the stratosphere. Sadly, you inform the starches and grains that, like the donuts and the chocolate cake, they must leave your house immediately. There is a second aspect of ignorance that is maiming and killing diabetics all over the world and guaranteeing that they stay diabetics year after year after year. That ignorance comes from the flawed science of the 1970s, a science which has been proven to be false, but which many doctors and so-called diabetes experts still stubbornly cling to as though it came straight from heaven. I'm talking about the idea that fat is evil, harmful, deleterious, detrimental, and the enemy of all humankind. Bad fat, nasty fat, evil fat, monstrous fat. Well, if you really believe this, of course, you'll cut the fat out of your diet, or at least cut it down so much that it's a tiny little % of the foods you eat. And if you do that, you will have to replace the fat with something else. We have to eat. So if we determine we're not going to eat much fat, we'll have to either increase our protein or increase our carbohydrates. There's no way around it. There are only 3 macronutrients: fat, protein, and carbs. And if you slash any one of these nutrients from your diet, survival instincts will kick in, and you will greatly increase one of the other 2. And in most cases, when people cut fat way down low, they replace the fat with carbohydrates, which is exactly what we saw with the food pyramid from the 1980s. Cut the fat, increase the carbs. Slash that fat, magnify the carbs. And that, my friends, is a huge problem for diabetics. And yet that is precisely what many doctors and dietitians will tell diabetics to do: cut the fat, increase the carbs, and by all means take your meds. It is a prescription for disaster. You will need more and more meds and eventually more and more insulin. What diabetics have been told is in truth the perfect storm for creating ever-deteriorating diabetes and the need for constant medication. Not in the hopes that you'll improve, but just to try to hold off the end for a while. Eventually, you'll succumb, but what can you do? After all, according to the experts, diabetes is a chronic and progressive disease, right? And as a result, diabetics stay diabetics for the rest of their lives. Given what they believe, given their lack of hope and their lack of motivation, there's no other outcome as long as they continue to live in the dark. The good news in all of this is that once we understand why diabetics stay diabetics, we can do something about these 3 factors, and the result is something I hear every day from people who watch this channel, and that is that diabetics can become non-diabetics according to the numbers. Now, the first factor that has to be transformed is the lack of hope. That's an easy one if you watch this channel. I do interviews with all kinds of people who have brought their A1Cs from diabetic to non-diabetic levels, oftentimes in a matter of months. And I also love to share stories of victories. On top of that, you can just scroll down the comments on my videos, and you're almost sure to see numerous testimonies of victories. Men and women who are former diabetics. When you see just how many people are finding victory over diabetes, hope springs up. Are you really going to be the only person who cannot see victory? Everybody else can, but you can't? I don't think so. Victory is possible for you, my friend. The second factor is motivation, and that is where my good friend Mike Demeter comes in. He will tell you when you're going in the right direction and when you're headed astray. He will compliment you when you make good food choices, and he'll rebuke you when you make bad ones. And if you don't give up on Mike, he'll steer you to a diet that works for you, and you will thrill as you watch your fasting glucose, your A1C, and your post-meal blood sugar numbers going down, down, down. Motivation? You will have more motivation than you need with Mike around. The third factor is ignorance, and that is quickly solved. Watch this channel. Watch lectures by Dr. Jason Fung and Ken Berry and Eric Berg and Sten Ekberg. And oh yeah, Mike can help with this as well. You don't need me to lecture you about starches. Mike will have a lot to say about them if you'll just give him a chance to speak with you about it. Before long, you'll come out of the dark and into the light. And if you bother to read unbiased reports and studies and research, you'll discover that fat, far from being your enemy, is actually your friend. As you cut your carbs low and embrace butter and ghee, heavy cream, fatty meats and fatty fish, nuts and avocados, you'll discover that the levels of fat in your blood, your triglycerides, will take a nosedive and leave you with far better numbers than you had when you ate little fat and mostly carbs. I know that's strange, but I hear it over and over again. More fat on your plate means less fat in your blood. So to review, the 3 reasons why diabetics stay diabetics are these. 1, a lack of hope that anything they do will make any difference. 2, a lack of motivation. And 3, ignorance of 2 major truths. First, that non-sweet carbs, starches, and grains can be just as problematic as the sweet carbs. And second, that fat is not your enemy. Now, if you eat both high carb and high fat, then yes, that can be a real problem. And that is essentially what the standard American diet involves. But as long as you keep the carbs low, you can raise the healthy fats high, and your diabetes will turn and run away from you like a scared chicken. Okay, that's it for today. Be sure and give the video a thumbs up so YouTube will rank it higher in its search engine, and more people will be able to see it. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel and then click that bell icon so you'll be notified every time we post a new video. God bless. See you again soon.